Welcome back to CKLA Chats. I am DLC Foster-Yankey, and I'm joined by my co-host.
Ashley Giles, Team 3.
Right, so thanks for joining us for Lesson 2 in 4th grade, final unit of 4th grade, Treasure Island. And today, like I said, we're going to be talking about Lesson 2, the sea chest. So core text for Lesson 2 is Chapter 2, titled The Sea Chest. Students are going to be reading to understand what happens when the pirates search the inn and how Jim joins forces with the doctor and the choir to plan a treasure hunting voyage. Sounds exciting. Have you read Chapter 2?
I have not, and I'm just noticing, we could probably talk about this later, how you get the purpose for reading. We'll have to change those on the others. Just FYI.
Ah,
So, no, I have not read. Let me see. What is chapter 2? No, I just did chapter 1.
so three components for Lesson 2. First is reading for 45 minutes, where you'll see the teacher introduce the chapter. They'll read Chapter 2, followed by a chapter discussion, and then do some word work for the word stun. There's a language component for 30 minutes, where the teacher will talk about modal auxiliary verbs, and then introduce the root bio from morphology. And then in writing, they will introduce an adventure story for. So let's kick it off with the reading. Our cub is. Students will know the significant events in Chapter 2 of Treasure Island and the definition of foreshadowing. They'll understand the author's, should say, use of foreshadowing and be able to summarize the key details of Chapter 2 by writing a summary of the chapter. So let's talk through the reading component of Lesson 2. The teacher, for introduce the chapter, number 1 for 10 minutes, the teacher will introduce students to Chapter 2. And the text tells students they're going to read Chapter 2, the sea chest and the blind man. They'll follow their same routine of using the table of contents to locate the chapter, preview those vocabulary words. Like we talked about in Lesson 1, they may want to spend most of their emphasis on those Tier 2 vocabulary words. In this lesson, those are ensue, impending, stun, bulk, and ransack. And then they'll move on to number 2, read the chapter for 20 minutes. And in this component, the students will be reading the chapter silently, and the teacher will pause them every 1 or 2 pages to pose some literal, inferential, and evaluative questions about the chapter. Next, number 3, they're going to be discussing the chapter for 10 minutes. Get to that page. There is a think question that asks, when authors give details that refer to future events, it is called foreshadowing. In this chapter, details suggest there might be some trouble for the readers in the future. What clues in the text suggestions? So the class is discussing that inferential. There are some supports in the margins that the teacher can use to support that.
Sarah, I want to stop you real quick. So in this chapter, and by the way, I did read this chapter 2. When I was reading this the other day, I was like, I have to keep reading. So yes, I have. But I want to say, since the students are reading this silently, I'm thinking like a teacher. I'm internalizing. Hopefully, I've read it out already as well as a teacher prior to my students reading it, and I'm going to inform my students. Okay, read till the end of this page and stop. Give me, and then have a question posed, like really being intentional. Like, don't just say silent reading. No, we have to read the first 2 paragraphs. After the first 2 paragraphs, stop and then pose those questions. So just being intentional about that. I just want to throw that out there because it says read independently. That doesn't mean read the whole chapter and then ask questions. Pose whenever it indicates for you to stop and pose those questions after the reading of that page. Just ensure that teachers are doing that.
That's a good point. Thank you for adding that. And as you were saying that, I was thinking you could even Expose the students to the question before they read, so that
Love
they,
it.
as they're reading, they have that question in mind. They know what they're looking for, and that will
Absolutely.
make it more engaging for them too, so they know
Yes.
what's going to be asked of them. Take some notes.
Purpose. Yeah, purpose. Yep.
So finally, in the reading component, there is word work for 5 minutes. Follows the same routine that word work has since the beginning of the school year. The teacher will ask students for ransack, what are some other examples of things being ransacked after they give them an example sentence. And students will use the stem, they ransacked blank, looking for blank. And then the activity for that is synonyms activity for follow up. And that reading component.
All right. So this takes us to the writing component. And as always, we want to start off um, with the focus. So students will accurately use modal auxiliaries and verb and the verbs to be. Okay, so students have to use these words correctly. So in advance, there's advanced prep for this. These charts are in the digital components. If you have chosen to either pull this up on your Prometheum, I suggest making them an anchor chart. But however you decide to present this, make sure you have this prepared and ready to go before. So for this section, you will spend a total of 15 minutes, but for this grammar part, it's only 15 minutes because we divide that between the 15 minutes between the grammar and the morphology. So first talking about the modal auxiliary verb and the to be verbs, you're going to explain to them, well, really review, because last unit they were introduced to modal auxiliary verbs. So the teacher is going to review these verbs and the modal auxiliary verbs with the students, remind them that they just reviewed it they introduced it during the American Revolution unit. Refer to this anchor chart. You're going to have the students read the singular subjects, and you have to make sure that they're able to determine if the verb does it agree with the present tense. So students should be familiar with this. Students need to read the plural subjects and be able to indicate if it agrees with the present tense. So they need to make sure that the subjects and the verb tense, they agree. This is a review again. And then students have to orally create a sentence using the verbs in either a singular or a plural form. So they have to write it correctly. After that, you are going to present that modal auxiliary vote. You're going to focus your attention to the auxiliary verbs poster, either, like I said, on the Promethean or in your room. Teacher is going to remind the students the definition. Students will do the same process as they did with the to be verbs. With these verbs, they're going to read the verb and make sure that, does it make sense? Do they agree? So have the students read the auxiliary verb to express the ability in the present tense, and then they're going to read it and make sure it's in the past tense. Then students are going to have to create a sentence correctly using the modal auxiliary verbs in either the present tense or the past tense. There is a activity page for this, activity page 2.2, where the students are going to display their understanding of correctly writing and using these verbs correctly. I personally would do the first one in each section with the students before you send them off to complete that. It says here, direct the students to the first section, read the directions. Yes, and I will just do an example. If they don't finish that with the time remaining, remember it's only 15 minutes. This can be taken home for homework. Now this brings us to the next section, which is the grammar. And in the grammar, they're going to focus on the root word bio. And they need to be able to use that word. Look at that. It says, use these words correctly in the sentence. Excuse me. You're going to tell the students that we're going to learn the word bio today. Hopefully you have an anchor chart and you have a running list of prefixes or suffixes that you have been using all year long, because let me tell you, this does not go away. I remember being a teacher. If my students were familiar with the root, the prefix, or the suffix, they could attach that prefix or suffix to any word, and that will help. If they know the definition, they're going to be able to figure out the meaning of that word. So hopefully you're really focusing on this word work part, this morphology and prefixes and suffixes, because it really helps students to be able to decode words that they're unfamiliar with, that they're going to come across. So for this section, you're going to tell them that you're talking about the Greek root word bio. Tell them what it means, that it's a base. You're going to display a poster in the classroom. Explains how the teacher will explain how it's pronounced. You're going to explain that it could be a noun, a verb, or an adjective, and it indicates a teacher should write the word on the board, talk about the different parts of speech on how it could be used. Like, for example, biology is a noun, and it means the study of life. So telling them each of the verb tenses and how it means and how it changes the word, like depending on the word you attach, it will change the verb tense of it or the meaning of it. And then for your check for understanding, it says have students provide a sentence using the word biology on index cards or sticky notes. So they just have to use the word in a sentence. Then you're going to relate the word biography back to our treasure island and talk about, use a sentence about Stevenson and his biography. So story about his life, right? So we just made that relatable to the unit. Have students make sure, so your check for understanding, I want to go back to that, is just ensuring that students can use the word correctly and it makes sense in the sentence, with the meaning. And they'll continue to have this following chart as a guide on activity page 2.3, and it's showing students how you can attach the word bio to other words, and then it changes the meaning. And so there's a chart indicated. Would you have this up in your classroom, Sarah, or would this be something you display? I mean, I just like the fact that it'll show the students' bio can be attached to other words and it'll change the meaning. Like, I think that's important for the students to know.
Yeah, for sure. Like for each root or prefix or suffix that we're learning throughout the unit, I would have, I think, an individual anchor chart for each chart for
Okay.
bio by itself, and that is a root.
Awesome. And then, so this activity page 2.3, the students will be breaking the words down, and this is also a homework activity that they will complete, of course, once your explicit teaching of how that word breaks down and all that great stuff. Then we're going to move to the next section. Our next section is writing. Students will select the setting for their original adventure story. So remember, they are reading an adventure, and they are also going to be planning and writing their own adventure story. And so today they're going to be focusing on the setting. Okay, keeping in mind, it's an imaginative, it's an adventure story. It's an imaginative setting, right? So I know that was an element from the Core Connection. And so something to prepare in advance or to display, make sure students have this at hand, features of an adventure story, meaning these are all the elements that the students need to have in their story. They need to make sure they have character, setting, plot, and theme. It says explain that, there are many types of stories, but they're going to talk about adventure related to what they're reading. Make sure you have this chart visible. And basically the students are going to focus on the setting, when and where the story takes place, related back to the setting of Treasure Island was the inn, the Admiral Benbow Inn. So just showing the connection, like we're going to make a story similar to what we're reading. And so the setting in the story we're reading in Treasure Island is this, but what is your setting going to be? Make sure that my takeaway from this was that the setting can be specific. So it says indicate that the settings are both specific and general. Okay, and so when they're thinking of their setting, make sure they're specific, like somewhere in a faraway land, but somewhere in a faraway land, a house in Gullah Gullah Island or something like that, explain, the teacher also needs to explain that this is a faraway place and faraway time ago. Remember, imaginative. I think of another book that I used to read to my students, A Wrinkle in Time. Students have read these adventure stories before with these stories with imaginative settings. So maybe help them make that connection as well. There's a check for understanding here as they're thinking, and I want to go back before the check for understanding. We need to be modeling this writing. Okay, there is time to model as we go through the lessons. You'll see that they will want you to create an introduction with them when we get there. So if I'm a teacher, I'm thinking of a setting for my story or our class story. So the check for understanding says ask students. Oh, we talked about this. Ask them to think of other stories that they have read. Like I said, A Wrinkle in Time would be a good example to talk about the setting. Ask them what they've read. You have some readers. Hopefully, you have many readers in your classroom. They're able to tell you, well, this story was had this setting to help them in the creation of their setting for this story. Also, refer back to our Treasure Island reader when they're talking about the characters and paying attention to the plot. Ask students to cite evidence from the text that talks about characters. Before students are actually writing their piece or thinking of their setting, they're relating it to what they're already reading. They're looking at the plot in Treasure Island. They're looking at the characters. Is the setting, is it dangerous? Where they are. Is there a mystery involved or a task that needs to be accomplished? So they're really analyzing what they're reading in order to create their imaginative setting. So the goal, you want your students to write their own adventure story. And it says here, Treasure Island is a model. So that's what I said. Your students are using Treasure Island as a model to write their own story.
Not a pirate story, though.
Say it again.
Not a pirate story.
Yes, not a so yeah. So it's not a pirate story. So there is a prompt. It's in your digital components. They're just writing an adventure. And the prompt is here, and I can't read that, but the prompt is in your digital connectors. They're just writing a imaginative story, not about pirates, but their adventure, an adventure that they decide to write about. And I can't read it. I wish I could.
It says, imagine a character gets lost in a remote, isolated area like the jungle, desert, mountain, forest, tundra, or on an island. You may also choose a specific place for the setting of your story. Write a 1 to 2 page story in which you show how the character survives. And then there are some prompts to guide their thinking.
Right. And so, yes, I'm thank you that you said that, Sarah. It does indicate in the curriculum it's not a pirate story, but they're using the structures of the Treasure Island to help them write their story for this prompt. I do want to draw our attention to the supports on the side. We can provide students may struggle with coming up, being creative and coming up with an adventure story, a setting for this imaginary setting. So provide them with a bank of settings that they could use for their adventure story. We could have them brainstorm their ideas of different settings that you could use. And of course, teachers show your thinking as well or have students share their ideas so we can have that student discourse and talking with each other about the different settings that they're thinking about using. And so basically, they're thinking about their setting and they are going to figure out where the story takes place and when. And that's the goal of this lesson.
So I was thinking, like in that first support where it talks about clarifying the meaning of unknown words and phrases, in the prompt, I was thinking like where it says jungle, desert, mountains, like the different settings, the teacher might provide pictures of the
Gotcha.
different settings to kind of get the kids' imagination working.
Right.
And also, like I love that you suggested that they have a class story. Um, and I remember like when we used to do class stories in my class, like just writing random fiction, we would roll a dice and just randomly pick the setting, which I think one encourages the teacher to think on their feet and lets the
Mhm.
students see like, oh, she didn't already have this planned. Like
Right,
we
right,
are writing this together. It's not like she just copied it.
right. That's awesome. I love that.
Roll the dice and
Yeah,
really like truly in the moment, let them see you collaborating together and write.
right. That's that authentic learning, teaching and learning. Authentic. Yeah, it's being authentic. There you go.
So I think,
So
I mean,
that,
you could still have an exemplar, like one that you have prepared, but then also
right.
there's a class one that you really write together.
And to me, that's just enhancing the curriculum. You know, I'm not straying off. That's still with fidelity. I'm enhancing it. You know, so just yeah, I love it. Thank you. And that'll conclude the writing in this lesson. We want to thank you as always for joining us, and our contact information is there, and we will see you for lesson 3.
Thanks for watching.
Bye bye.